Good evening, everyone, and we're so happy that you were able to make it with us tonight for Season 5, Episode 23 of Doc Talks with Dr. Forrest Tennant and Friends. This is a really exciting show, and we also have some changes that will be announced throughout this show, so please take your notes. And Dr. Tennant, it's all yours, so please feel free to take it away. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much. This is going to be a very exciting show because we're interviewing in a few minutes Donna Sullivan. And if you don't know who Donna Sullivan is, let me assure you that she is probably maybe the single person, if not in the top 2 or 3 people, who has advocated for pain patients and done the work of the Lord in the recent years. She's the producer of a documentary called Complicated, which has to do with EDS. She serves on a lot of boards. She's been just a real champion. And anyway, I'm here with Dr. Ibsen, Dr. Guest. We're going to interview her here in a few minutes. So we're delighted to have her. What I'm going to talk about for the educational program here tonight is a subject and in introducing a concept and maybe a definition that you may or never have heard before. And it's what we call multi-system disease. Now that title sounds pretty boring. And let me also say right out front that nobody wants to hear the lecture I'm about to give. Why? It brings up issues that no one wants to deal with in the medical profession or as a patient. But also let me say this. There are 2 discoveries in pain medicine in the last 20 years that I think are at the top. One is the discovery of how receptor sites have to be activated to relieve pain. And that gets into the differences between chronic and intractable pain and central pain and regular pains. But I would have to say that the discovery and the understanding of multi-system disease ranks right up there with that. So this might surprise you, but I can also tell you from experience, this is not a lecture that's going to be fun to hear. It's not a lecture that you're going to be excited about. It's one, however, that everyone, in my opinion, has to know, so we might as well get started. Now, first off, what you need to know is the term system may sound funny to you. What are we talking about? It turns out that in medical practice, in medical science, we deal in systems. And you're familiar with this. You may not have called them systems. But for example, we have about 13 different systems in the body. And I'm going to read these off to you for just a moment. They're vision, dental, hearing, cardiovascular, respiratory, gastrointestinal, urinary, spine, spinal cord, brain, muscles, joints, connective tissue, and sexual tissues. So you've got about 13 different tissues in the body. Now, why are we giving this lecture and what's the big discovery? Now, almost everybody watching this and everybody who treats pain patients think of themselves as having one disease or one pain, and medical practitioners label you with one disease or one pain. You've either got CRPS, small fiber neuropathy, fibromyalgia, migraine, trigeminal neuralgia, adhesive arachnoiditis. You're given a single disease, probably because that's the prominent pain you have, and it's the disease that is recognized. And in medical practice today, from a practical point of view, you've got to have a disease, you've got to have a diagnosis, you've got to buy medicines, you've got to get things paid for, and the system is paid on one disease and one diagnosis. So multi-system disease is not part of the administrative system in medicine. However, what you need to know is that multi-system disease is here. Now, some of you may have seen a recent bulletin that we sent out in which people who had adhesive arachnoiditis didn't just have adhesive arachnoiditis, they have all other pain issues, okay? I want you to think of yourselves for just a moment. If you're a patient or if you're a practitioner, look at all the patients you see. When I go into a pain clinic today to consult, and I do this quite often, I like to sit down in the waiting room and talk to patients, say, what's your problem? And they start off say, well, I've got a leg problem, but I've also got a back problem. I've also got migraines. I got fibro. I got a wrist problem. In other words, I kind of hurt all over. Well, you know that's a multi-system disease right out front. In other words, they don't have just one pain problem. They've got a whole bunch of them. For example, we found out in surveying adhesive arachnoiditis patients that every single person had a whole lot of other pain problems before they got adhesive arachnoiditis. 100% of them almost said they had arthritis or neuropathies, 80% herniated discs, 75% migraine, 61% fibromyalgia, 58% irritable bowel, 55% TMJ, 50% Tarloff's, 50% bursitis, 47% had lost teeth, 41% spinal fluid leaks, 41% plantar fasciitis, tendinitis, chronic regional pain syndrome, costochondritis. In other words, what we have discovered and why the discovery is big is that the number one reason to have severe chronic pain or intractable pain is not CRPS, it's not adhesive arachnoiditis, it's not post-traumatic headaches, it's multi-system pain disease. You have pain in multiple systems, and this is not being recognized or talked about at all. Now, let me talk about this for a minute. First off, I want to show you the poster child for multi-system pain disease. Anybody recognize this fellow? Good old Elvis, all right? Now, he's the poster child for multi-system disease. As a matter of fact, if you read his book that I've written called The Strange Medical Saga of Elvis Presley, you'll see that he had, out of 13 systems, he had pain in about 9 or 10 of them, okay? And guess what? The public didn't know this, but his doctors did, and the doctors even used the term multi-system disease. I happened to be involved with his case because after he died, his doctors were charged with actual manslaughter, and I defended those doctors, but in the process, the judges gave me all his autopsies, laboratory records. I got to know his doctors personally. His book is where you can actually find his autopsy, all his laboratory work. And if you want to read about multi-system disease, read about Elvis Presley. What's also interesting about Elvis was he had EDS. After all, you can't do those gyrations and be as stiff as I am, okay? And he also had head trauma and autoimmunity. In other words, he had all the things that get involved in multi-system disease today. Now, first off, I want to define what we mean by multi-system disease and where the term comes from. This is not new, but it faded out of medical practice for a while. Let me tell you what, first off, multi-system disease means. There is one entity, one disease that is causing complications in multiple organs or multiple systems. In other words, one disease in many different systems. And that's what's being missed today in pain medicine and in pain control. This is the new frontier. We're not going to go anywhere until every pain clinic, every patient understands they don't just have CRPS, they just don't have trigeminal neuralgia or fibromyalgia. Chances are they've got multiple systems involved. And I'm going to come back and tell you more about this, but I want to tell you where the term comes from. The term multi-system disease actually originated back in the 1800s and was used in medical practice until around the 1950s or 60s, at which time the term died out. Now, I'm just old enough and trained in internal medicine long enough ago that we used that term. That's why the term is in Elvis's book, because his doctors were the old school and understood multi-system disease. Now, what did we mean? What was the original multi-system disease? From what I can tell historically, two things caused multi-system disease. One was syphilis, and the other was tuberculosis, okay? Now, in the 1800s, the most common cause of adhesive arachnoiditis was probably syphilis. There was some gonorrhea and there was some tuberculosis, but mainly syphilis. Now, syphilis, when you hear the term syphilis, what you think is it's a disease of the sex organs. That's true. But what people don't know is that that spirochete spreads in the blood. It goes to your brain and can cause dementia. It can go to your spine. It can go to your stomach. It can go to a lot of different places. In fact, when I was in medical school, I remember our professors saying, once you understand system, you're ready to practice medicine, because a patient could walk in with a knee problem or a back problem or a headache and have syphilis. And if you didn't understand the concept of a disease spreading throughout the body, one disease causing problems in multiple systems, you wouldn't have any idea how to approach that patient. Now, the second disease that became famous as a multi-system disease was tuberculosis. Now, when you think of tuberculosis, you think of the lung. And so the average person, the average doctor, I guarantee you the average medical student, has no concept that at one time before antibiotics, tuberculosis invaded all kinds of systems in the body. And so you had it in the lung, but it could spread to your intestine, your sex organs, your joints, your brain, and what have you. Now, we had a famous case at one time by the name of John F. Kennedy. Now, John F. Kennedy developed Addison's disease. Now, that's a failure of the adrenal glands. But in the days prior to John F. Kennedy's presidency, the major cause of Addison's disease was tuberculosis. In other words, the tuberculin bacilli would travel from the lung to the adrenal gland. Now, when John F. Kennedy ran for president, it became known to the public that he had Addison's disease. The problem was that everybody at that time thought it was tuberculosis that caused Addison's disease. His doctors had to do a lot of gyrations and a lot of semi-fraudulent reports to convince the public that no, he did not have tuberculosis. And there were, prestigious doctors said, we've just elected a president who's got to have tuberculosis because he has Addison's disease. What they didn't know is in 1964, when John F. Kennedy got elected, Addison's disease had become an autoimmune disease. John F. Kennedy did not have tuberculosis. He probably did have arachnoiditis, incidentally, because there's a famous film of his spine with dye in it. But anyway, so that's one of the things about those two diseases. So when I was trained back in the 60s as to be an internist, we talked about multi-system disease. And then at that time, we had a couple of new things come forward. There was a lung enzyme that seemed to maybe cause multiple problems. And the big one was systemic lupus. That systemic lupus could cause joint problems, intestinal problems, headaches, lung, skin. And some of you watching this have it, and you know all about multi-system disease. You never thought of it that way, perhaps. But you've got an autoimmune disease, a single entity that is causing you disease in several systems, okay? Now, why am I giving this lecture? Real simple. Until we have every doctor who treats pain patients, until we get every pain patient to realize that you may have multi-system pain disease, you may not get any better because you're not treating the cause, you're just treating an end product. You're treating one complication of a disease that is throughout your body, okay? Now, what do we know about multi-system disease today? And Elvis is a pretty good example. I have been studying multi-system disease in patients now for some time. And every time that I start surveying patients, 4 things show up, 4 big factors, and we're going to hear about one in a few minutes in some detail. One is the concept of genetic connective tissue diseases, of which the best known are EDS and Marfan's. We now know that when you're born with a genetic connective tissue defect, your ankle might be affected, then it might be your ear, then it might be your lung, it might be your muscles, it might be your arachnoid membrane. In other words, when you have a genetic connective tissue disease defect, it's going to affect maybe all of the 13 systems in the body. For example, I was always amazed to find out that most people with EDS lose a lot of teeth. Well, that's because their connective tissue in their gums is not holding up like a normal person. Okay? And incidentally, those gums can hurt too. All right? It's not uncommon to have, different problems and what have you. Now, the other thing that shows up a lot is trauma. We now realize that people who have serious trauma at some time in their life, regardless of what caused the trauma, maybe they fell off a roof, maybe it was sports, maybe it was military. Auto accidents is probably the most common, but we also have domestic violence. So people who have severe trauma end up later on with multi-system disease a lot of times. So why is that? Well, we're figuring all this out. So autoimmunity. We now know that there's a group of diseases that are autoimmune. We've got about 8 or 10 of them out there that are well known. But let me define again, and I've defined it on this program before, and I'm going to define it probably every time you listen to me. What is an autoimmune disease? An autoimmune disease is when some element in the body, some cell, some antibody, erroneously gets changed and erroneously believes that normal tissue is foreign tissue. And so it starts attacking the tissue. When it attacks the tissue, it first off causes inflammation, then it causes destruction. Okay? Now, so autoimmunity can destroy your kidneys, it can destroy your liver, it can destroy your arachnoid membrane, it can destroy your trigeminal nerves. In other words, autoimmunity seems to have no bounds. It'll just decide to show up in your carpal tunnel or your bowel or somewhere. And then at late stage, it turns out are diseases like CRPS or like small fiber neuropathies, pudendal neuropathy, for example, or adhesive arachnoiditis. No. And then lastly, viruses. Okay, viruses. Now, this is a big one. And the virus that's got the most attention is the Epstein-Barr virus. But Longcvd is letting the public know that a simple message. If a bacteria like tuberculosis or syphilis can cause multi-system disease, a virus can do it better. They're smaller, more virulent, can invade tissues easier, and they can also operate silently for years, and you never even know about it. And so we're starting to learn a lot about viruses and how they interplay with EDS, with trauma, and with autoimmunity. The studies are coming fast and furious, but the fact that we have these viruses are really a great resistance in medical practice. Nobody wants to face this thing. Now, Longcvd, for example, nobody's quite sure whether it's the virus still active or whether it's an autoimmunity from the virus. Most likely autoimmunity, and they're calling it Longcvd. And it's rather dramatic. Symptoms are there, you know you have it. Now, the trouble with some of the other viruses, like Epstein-Barr is the best known, but there's one called cytomegalovirus, there's herpes 6, there's paravirus, there are some other viruses. And what some of these viruses do, they'll spread throughout your systems and they're asymptomatic, causing a slow autoimmune process that may go on for years and you're unaware of it. It's asymptomatic. Then all of a sudden you wake up one day with ulcerative colitis or adhesive arachnoiditis or severe fibromyalgia. In other words, these viruses can invade these systems and stay almost asymptomatic and unknown for years until they finally destroy enough tissue that you wake up one day and realize you're sick and you're in pain, or you've got a cancer. Okay? So that's the way some of these viruses do work. Now I'm going to give you a little example. On Monday of each month, I spend some time with Dr. Jay Purcelli, who runs our foundation's research unit. And we took a new research subject in on Monday. I'm going to tell you about her because she's kind of symbolic of what we're talking about here. And anyway, this is a lady, she's 60. And she starts out, I ask her, when did your problems start? She says, I think they started when I had 2 serious auto accidents when I was in college. And She said, wasn't very long after that I got fibromyalgia. And I had that for quite a while. And then I got some arthritis in my hands. And then I started getting my neck problems where I had some discs though in my neck. And then I developed ulcerative colitis, which is a well-known autoimmune disease. And then one day she wakes up and what does she have? Adhesive arachnoiditis. In other words, she went right down the path of starting off with accidents, then probably some viral activity, and then autoimmunity, and then ends up with a terrible, painful disease. And this is the kind of history that you find when you start talking to people with severe chronic pain and severe intractable pain. And it should be proper. I'm here to call for every pain clinic, every doctor, every patient. Go back in history, put your story together, and look at these different systems. How many of them are affected in you, and do you have multi-system disease? So that's kind of where we're at the moment. It's a call. It's an awakening call. Nobody really wants to face it, but I would say this. This is new research, and it's our gateway to better treatment in the future. Most of these predilections or risk factors of multi-system disease can be identified, and we're starting to develop better control systems all the time. I do want to show you one other thing, that is a story here that I wanted to close out with and then introduce Ms. Sullivan. First off, here's a study. It's called A Small Study on the Prevalence of Viral Cells in People with MECFS, everybody who has it, myalgia, encephalitis, and chronic fatigue syndrome. They have now found excess Epstein-Barr cells in these people, and we've sort of suspected that for a long time. Here's something else that you should know. Here's an article, very well written. It's called Parasitic Infection and Autoimmunity. And we've known for years that certain of these parasites like Epstein-Barr can cause autoimmunity. Guess what the date of this paper is? 1991. So we've known about a lot of these for a long time. We just haven't put the pieces together. Well, we've got the pieces together now. And again, this may not sound like a sexy diagnosis. It isn't as much fun to listen to as trying to take a peptide or a real quick, fast cure of some kind. But it is the principle by which we're dealing with. And I will close this off and say, without question, in my surveys, in my studies, and in my visits to pain clinics, seeing my own patients, multi-system pain disease is now the number one cause of severe chronic pain and intractable pain in the United States. Okay? So you'll probably hear more about it in the future, and I welcome any comments that you might say. One other thing too, before I ask for Ms. Sullivan to come on, some of you may know that we're going to have the first national conference on adhesive arachnoiditis next month in Colorado. Those of you who want to learn all about adhesive arachnoiditis and become kind of experts, either for both yourself or in teaching, you'll want to be at this conference. We're going to be talking about a lot of things there, and we hope to bring the people up to date. A lot of people don't know, but in 2010, there was an international congress on adhesive arachnoiditis and Charloff cysts, and they made the statement, there is no cure or treatment for the disease. We've changed a lot of that since 2010, and people need to know about it. There's not only hope out there, we're getting a lot of control and a lot of good things. We hope this conference encourages doctors to treat it. We hope it encourages patients to learn more about it, and we hope a few people want to become educators and advocates for the disease. We hope to see you in Westminster on August 16th. The seminar, the conference is free. Unfortunately, the hotels and the planes charge you enough, but we are going to have a free conference for anybody who wants to attend. Sure hope to see you there. With this, it is my great pleasure to introduce somebody. If you don't know her, you need to know her. Her name is Donna Sullivan. She's getting some notoriety these days, which you get when you associate with Hollywood. She is the producer of the film Complicated. It's a documentary done by John Rodas, who's known in Hollywood as a first-class documentary maker. This film's already up for a lot of awards, being seen, and anybody who's interested in EDS, multi-system disease, pain, needs to hear from Donna Sullivan. Now, believe it or not, Donna's not just the producer of this film. She put together the advocacy and the money to get it done. Believe it or not, she's the director of Pathways to Trust. She's also on the board of the Coalition Against Pediatric Pain, the Connective Tissue Coalition, Mito Action Advocacy Support, EDS Society Ahead Coalition, and the Do No Harm Project. We need to hear from her, right? And she's here tonight.
Hi, everybody. First of all, Dr. Tennant, thank you. I am really honored to be here, and I'm just grateful to kind of be here with everybody. I do have to make one small correction, though. John Rodas, who's an incredible patient advocate, was actually the person who led me to you. The film is directed by a gentleman by the name of Andrew Abrahams. He's an Oscar-nominated film director who had done a film many years ago about chronic Lyme disease, which was also Oscar qualified. So I just wanted to clarify that. John Rodas will love hearing the credit, though. This will make his day.
That's great. Well, let me, Donna, can we start from the beginning? How did you get so interested in this whole issue?
Like anyone else who goes into advocacy, it's because you're affected by it, right? Nobody really says they're going to grow up and I want to necessarily advocate for specific diseases. Usually you have some kind of connection. So for me, I had some health issues growing up, but nothing significant. So I have 3 children, and we kind of fell into a rabbit hole in medicine, one of the top children's hospitals in the country. So I had my oldest daughter who had spinal fusions and was living with intractable pain. I had a 10-year-old who developed severe complex regional pain syndrome to the point where his leg was purple. And I had a middle daughter who was also struggling with her own pain condition. And it was a real rabbit hole that my family fell into. And we spent a lot of time in hospitals. We went through various pediatric pain programs. And I learned pretty quickly that it's really a real no man's land. It's very much the Wild West. There's not enough understanding of what it means to have these pain conditions. There's no treatments, there's no cures. And worst off, there's not a lot of really understanding because medicine and the way our healthcare system is set up, it's just not set up for people that have long-term chronic complex illnesses. So, my family, my kids, we lost 10 years. My kids lost their entire childhood trying to just be okay with these pain conditions. So that's really what kind of started my advocacy. Was I just some kind of a mom with a big mouth?
It sounds like you just weren't an advocate. You had to be a caretaker and advocate and nurse and everything else.
Yeah. It was a mess. It was a mess. And suffice it to say, we saw the very best and very worst in medicine. We had the honor of working with some great palliative physicians, and we had the honor of being thrown out of hospitals by some very ignorant, orthopedics. So, again, we kind of saw the best and worst of what was out there. And it was a lot. We were living in hospitals, and to this day, it's still not over. Pain is forever, and people don't always understand that. I'm happy to report that my children are doing better. It took us 5 pediatric hospitals in multiple states to get them to where they are today. And the journey's, still far from over. So how did I get started? I started 12 years ago with a group called the Coalition Against Pediatric Pain. It was a group of moms that I'd met from Boston Children's Hospital. We all had kids that had these serious pain problems, and they also had other things happening. They all seemed to be fainting. They all seemed to be having issues with rashes. They all seemed to be having what looked like dislocations, and they were being told it was psychological. So that's kind of where we started. A group of moms got together and said, something's going on. We were told that they may have this condition, Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, and this group of moms would have yard sales, and we would fly in doctors that knew anything about connective tissue disease or Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, and we started having medical think tanks, just talking to them about what we were seeing, what our kids were seeing. And of course, once we became a nonprofit for pediatric pain, This was 2012. People barely believed that kids had chronic pain. There were no resources for children in chronic pain. So we got flooded, we got completely inundated. And that's kind of how I got started, with the advocacy space, um, trying to educate about what does it really mean to live this life of pain and what really happens to people when you go into the hospital and you're treated poorly or your physicians don't know how to help you, but also don't know how to, care for you, which are kind of two different things, you know. They might not have a treatment or a cure, but there's still a way to help improve quality of life. So that was kind of what we focused on. We focused on really trying to help support these children and families who are becoming very isolated and disabled, and nobody was doing anything.
Can you tell us a little bit from your experiences how how do many physicians even like know what the disease is or recognize it? How do you feel? You've been at this advocacy now for a while. Have we made progress? What do people know about the disease?
So, if do you want me to speak specifically about connective tissue disease? Because a lot of the things that you were saying, yeah. So let's start at the very beginning, right? We're people and we're all connected, right? We're all connected. And for those who don't know anything about Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, it's a connective tissue disease. Connective tissue is everywhere in the body. And for a long time, medicine didn't really understand that. And part of the reason is because it was only a paragraph in a medical textbook. And the primary symptom was that you were hypermobile, you were flexible. But nobody really took into account, well, what happens when those joints move? What happens when the nerves are being compressed? What happens when a rib is out? What happens when your blood supply is cut off or being challenged? Nobody's really been looking at all of that. So, you go into a doctor with a pain problem, something like a complex regional pain syndrome, which my son had, he was pretty evident because he was purple and ice cold. So even though that's a diagnosis that can often take people years, for us it went relatively quickly. With the Ehlers-Danlos, though, the average time to diagnosis can be 17 to 22 years, according to a recent study. So people can go a lifetime and have no idea they have a connective tissue disease. And I think that's one of the biggest messages in the film is, there is this condition, hypermobile Ehlers-Danlos. We know it affects 1 in 500 people. It is very highly underdiagnosed. It wreaks havoc in the body and it can impact multiple systems. So, how good are doctors at diagnosing it? Not great. Um, Primary care, which I keep hoping will be the front line on this disease eventually, still unfortunately, is still learning and is not great at flagging people. A lot of times you might have a bad surgery or an event that will cause your health to get really bad and cascade. And sometimes that's when people get diagnosed. But yeah, I wish I could say that it's, an easy thing to diagnose, but it's not. And a lot of times it will look different. So, for example, I was diagnosed with lupus. Turns out I'm told possibly RA. And then I was told, oh, wait, it's a connective tissue disorder. I had multiple opinions, which is also another fun journey that I know everybody in this room can understand, right? You see different doctors, you get different input. Um, but yes, so it can mimic other things, and that can also make it really problematic to diagnose.
Can you tell us a little bit? You belong to a lot of the different organizations. Can you tell us some of the things that you're involved with at this time to move the needle forward and
Sure.
maybe even educate some of us on what we can do?
Sure. So, just to give you a quick background about the film, because some of you may have heard of it. So, 9 years ago, our nonprofit was taking care of kids and families with pain, and we were watching them get destroyed within the medical system. And it was becoming a case of have and have nots. If you could travel for care, you might get lucky and find a doctor that could help you. And we had another problem that we were seeing these families being reported to Child Protective Services, which is a whole other challenge because child protection is the most important thing in the world. Nothing's more important than protecting kids. But for some reason, these child abuse physicians were seeing these kids come in with multi-system diseases, right, which we now know is a multi-system disease, thinking this kid can't possibly have all these things wrong with them. They must be making it up, or their parents must be making it up. So because of that, we had a number of families that were coming to us. So we just had to do something, because I was watching these children who were brilliant and strong be treated as if they were weak and psychological. So we wanted to make a film to show what was happening to them in the margins of the medical system. On top of that, we had other kids that were coming in so complex, and they were suffering greatly and they were dying. And nobody was even acknowledging that Ehlers-Danlos can be a complex disease. So that's why we took a step back and said, we have to make a film. We just have to start following. So we started following families, and the ending result is the film Complicated, which we decided to show kind of what happens to these families when you can't get care. And we did it through the lens of a multi-system disease, Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, because I truly believe that Ehlers-Danlos is one of the biggest missteps in medical history. I think, if you can get doctors to look at you through the lens of Ehlers-Danlos or a multi-system disease, a lot of these other things that we all deal with, I think might have shorter diagnostic journeys. I think they might shift the lens and look at us a little bit different. And I actually just came back from a conference, and I do have a little bit of exciting update on that term, and as far as what the understanding is of connective tissue disease. But that was the purpose of the film. So your question was, what am I doing in advocacy? So we've launched the film, and we're hoping to get it out soon. It's being shown, and Dr. Tennant is, of course, featured in the film. We're very grateful to have him, and he helps us explain why connective tissue disease is something that needs to be considered, especially with pain patients. With the film, we're working on an impact plan. So I'm putting together with a whole team of people a medical education program that we're hoping to be able to roll out to medical students and, to the general population. We want to teach people how to advocate, but we also want to teach physicians about this experience and what's really going on. And unfortunately, push medical schools to teach more about this in medical schools. So that's the work I do with Pathways to Trust. They're a really unique organization. We go into medical schools and we provide these seminars. And Jamie spoke with my colleague Cheryl today, so she knows a little bit more about it. We actually bring in actors because, there's a lot of things that can get in the way between you and your doctor. And some of them are pretty crummy, like bias and stigma, right? Let's face it. You're the complex patient. You're the one with the chronic pain. They don't know how to help you. And there's a certain shame, a stigma that sometimes patients feel when they go in, because you feel bad. Like you feel bad. And that's horrible. That never should be that way, right? We're going there for help. But sometimes doctors make you feel that way. So in Pathways to Trust, we kind of take a look at, what are the issues of prejudging a patient and bias and racism, and what are some of the other factors that can sometimes interfere with medical objectivity. And we actually did a program on chronic pain called Time to Listen to Chronic Pain. And we bring in actors, and we actually have a physician speak, we have a patient speak and share their story. So that's a great way to get involved. And then we have actors act out a scenario, and the medical students have to kind of pick it apart and look to see kind of where the appointment goes right or where the appointment goes wrong. And, I really think, medical schools is really the way we're going to change this. The other advocacy work I do is within research with the Connective Tissue Coalition, which is with our fearless leader, John Rodas, who is doing some of the best work out there, trying to get researchers really focused on, for a long time, we had a society that was saying this is a rare disease. And by classifying it as a rare disease, it really held back research money and resources for patients. And unfortunately, it kind of hurt patients. It's not rare. It's 1 in 500. John Rodas screams that from the rooftops every chance he gets. So I'm going to say that again for him. So, I think that's kind of the way I'm supporting families with TCAP. I'm educating, and I'm hopefully going to be, helping researchers, because we got to fix this, right? We got to fix this.
Yeah, let me interrupt. You just said something that has been on my mind for some time, and that is classifying these things as rare. Do you now call it an unusual disease? Do you call it, it's just out there? What I've been bothered by using this rare label for CRPS and for arachnoiditis for some time, because the minute you say it's a rare disease, nobody wants to have anything to do with you.
Right. Exactly. 100%.
So
And I have to say, Dr. Tennant, we've shown the film at a few conferences, and I've gotten comments back from people saying what you said in the film. When you said in the film it's a multi-system disease, you can see light bulbs going off. This is how we need to talk about it. And yes, when we talk about advocacy, doctors, when they hear rare, they just glaze over. I don't need to, medical students too. Why do I need to learn about this if I'm not going to see it? So yes, EDS we know is not rare. We know one form is 1 in 500, but for the other conditions you're talking about, yes, I think they're a lot more common than people are realizing, and I don't think the rare classification helps anyone, especially now when funding is cut.
do you say it's an unusual disease or an emerging disease?
I always say to people it's an unrare rare disease, or it's a rarely recognized but very common disease.
Poorly recognized.
Yeah, rarely recognized.
That's,
yeah.
Anybody want to disagree with that? Mark, yeah, Scott, anybody? Poorly recognized. I like that. That's a nice label. Okay. Because, we really don't know how common these are, which gets me to one of my next questions.
I do have something to say about that, Dr. Tennant.
Yeah, go ahead, Mark. Come right in.
It's not rare if you got it.
Exactly.
There you go. That's pretty common, right?
Yep,
Yeah.
Exactly.
100% if you've got it.
That's right.
Yeah, I like that. You bet.
Ms. Sullivan, how are the pharmacists treating you?
How are the who treating us?
The pharmacists when you go to the pharmacy.
Oh, so when we go to pharmacy, yes. Well, that's a whole other issue. So yeah, so initially, right, especially in pediatrics, pain management is, really hard because the goal is not to get addicted. But, as we all know, pain needs treatment. There's a reason there's pain medications. And the opioid, epidemic has been horrific for everybody, for so many people that live with chronic pain. So yeah, it can be a little rough. I will share, I will tell you, I have had, you get treated as a drug seeker sometimes in emergency rooms. I had a situation once, I tell this story. My daughter was getting discharged to go to her grandmother's funeral, and we'd been fortunate to get palliative care involved, and they gave her a medication that wasn't commonly used, but was, this doctor recommended it so she could discharge, go to her grandmother's funeral, and then come back for her tethered cord surgery 2 days later. And the hospitalist came in to check us out and said, "Oh, I see you've been written this prescription. You could get addicted or die in your sleep, but I wish you luck." And he walked out of the room. To my 15-year-old child, he said that. Yeah. So, how are you treated? Not well. And it's unfortunate. I think with pharmacy, I made a point of really trying to get to know my pharmacist, as far as, just kind of saying, this is what's going on, this is the medication, and talking to them, asking them questions, and just really trying to rely on them, because I've had to rely on the pharmacist a lot. I've had to rely on pharmacogenetic testing for the whole metabolism profile. For those who don't know about it, it's just that bodies can metabolize medication differently. So in connective tissue, there's a high prevalence of people that are high metabolizers or low metabolizers. So if you are a low metabolizer, you might need, if you're a slow metabolizer, you need less medication. If you're fast, you might need more. And they don't really account for that when they're dosing. So that's like a whole other issue. But, in all honesty, and I've been, like many of you, I've been in ugly places. I always feel like it's good to just kind of step back and just try to think about, how can I communicate this in the most effective but least offensive way, right? Because sometimes in your head, you're just like, come on.
Yeah. Is Dr. Guess here? I wanted to
Hi,
ask,
Dr. Tennant. Yes, I'm here.
do you recall some years ago, you and I did a study on intractable pain patients as to how many had EDS, and we were a little shocked, were we not?
We were absolutely blown away, because I believe it turned out to be about 60% of our particular subset of patients. We had a small enough group where we just screened everyone.
Mm-hmm. See, and can I share two thoughts? So one is, I said that I've got some exciting updates. There is a lot of research being done finally, and there is publishing that's coming, but they're finally starting to look at the disease more, like connective tissue through an immune system lens. Like, why is the connective tissue the way it is? Or why is it that you can be okay and then you hit puberty and then everything falls apart, or you have a surgery and everything falls apart, or you get a virus and everything falls apart? And it is starting to look that way. So, when you talk about kind of the crossover, I think a lot of these conditions cross over. And, as Dr. Tennant said at the beginning, what's the commonality? And I know we don't know it yet, but it does seem like there's something in that immune system, I don't know. I'm not a doctor, so I don't know, but you guys will figure it out.
Right. One thing that I personally have been a real fan of, when Scott, and I did those early studies, and these were people who were referred to us on high dose opioids. They're the worst kind of patients. And we said 60% we thought had EDS. Since then, and they've brought out the concept of hypermobile spectrum disease, when you add that in, you really start becoming you really start wondering, are people who are born with these connective tissue defects, are they the ones that are going to develop the autoimmunity? Are these the ones that are going to go bad with an epidural? Are these are at risk for surgery? I personally don't think an EDS patient should have an epidural, for example, because a question I was going to ask you, one of my real questions is, does the autoimmunity that we see with EDS, is that independent of viruses, or is it a combination, do you think, or is it mixed?
So that's a great question. And I don't mean to turn this on you, a question with a question, but you kind of,
That's all right.
you have a little bit of a chicken and the egg thing here, right? And I've thought about this a lot. You're born with your gene, or you have your connective tissue, but then you have things that happen that can change the way things are. So, when you're saying to me, did the autoimmunity come first? I don't have an answer. I was autoimmune with what a doctor at a top hospital said was lupus and RA, and then all of a sudden I had a negative ANA. So I can't explain that. My body shifted, and it's funny. People with here's what I will tell you. Real world evidence. Patient data, just collecting pure, I can tell you that 14 years ago, I sat in a room with moms and we said, all these kids have autoimmunity. All these kids have fainting. All these kids have what we now know as POTS. All these kids, we knew what these comorbidities were way before the doctors had time to clinically publish them. And I think if you continue with your data with your patients through the lens of the question you're asking me, what role does the autoimmunity play? Is it part of the connective tissue? You're probably going to be really surprised at how much crossover. This is all connected. I mean, again, I truly believe that it's the biggest misstep in medicine. It's the biggest mistake ever made, not to look at these pain conditions through the lens of connective tissue disease.
You got my vote, of course. Okay. Yeah.
That's a lot.
Very interesting. Mark or Scott, you've got some questions you want to ask her? Because I've got a whole bunch more.
Well, then I'll let you ask questions, because I'm just listening at this point.
Well, because like CRPS, I have a fabulous, what causes pain, right? So with Ehlers-Danlos, we know that there's a lot of subluxations and even micro subluxations. So if you have Ehlers-Danlos, one of the first things I talk to people about is you need to see someone that does manual energy technique, osteo manipulation. And I'm not talking about a chiropractor. Those are good. Chiropractors can be great. But if you have connective tissue, you have to be more gentle, because alignment can really make a difference. And, I'll share my other daughter this week had a situation with her rib out and her shoulder out, and we couldn't quite get her where we wanted to, and we couldn't get her to her PT, and she started losing feeling in her arm. And so I brought her to an orthopedic clinic, and they x-rayed her and said, oh, it's coming from her neck. Go to physical therapy. The muscles are relaxed. She'll be fine. I bring her the next day to my osteo physical therapist who immediately says, her pulse is different in her arm. She's on her way to thoracic outlet syndrome. Let me realign her ribs. Let me realign her shoulder. And my daughter slept for the first night, in 3 days. So I think biomechanics is also a highly, important part of all of this too, with the connective tissue and with like things like complex regional pain syndrome. I know there's type 1, type 2, but what is it in the body that's making the nervous system overreact?
Donna, I want to give you my pet peeve here for the moment, okay?
Lay it
Let me
on.
tell you my problem in dealing with this. I'll see somebody or hear from somebody and they clearly got EDS, they're double jointed, can touch the floors, the whole 9 yards. And then somebody sends them off for testing. And they come back with negative tests. And they don't believe me when I tell them they've got a connective tissue disease. What do we do about this testing situation? As you know, the ones that test for the cardiovascular defect tend to show up better, in my opinion, than the others. But you've got people in the EDS community, if you will, are almost telling people if you test negative, you don't have it.
Right. So
How are we going to deal with these tests? What do you know?
This is even
Tell
a
us.
bigger, this is even a bigger issue. So, take a step back and let's look at why it's been so hard for doctors to understand connective tissue or even care about it. And it really goes back to a couple things. One, that it wasn't taught in medical school. Two, when we had the beginning of a society that was trying to come up with the diagnostic criteria, they did it with good intention, but it was adult focused. It didn't take in a lot of patient input. It was more clinicians talking about their patients. And unfortunately, it was very narrow. So, things like the Beighton scale are useful, but they don't account for things like puberty. It doesn't account for things like male versus female flexibility. There's just a lot of pieces. But because you now have 14 different types and you have things like hypermobile EDS and hypermobility spectrum disorder, there's just so much confusion. The diagnostic criteria is not clear. And so that's one problem. The other problem is if there's no gene, if I can't test it, does it really exist? So that's the other problem, which thankfully we're making progress on. The Norris lab, as we talk about in the film, has, a possible gene. It's not going to be the only gene. It's not going to be a one gene disease. It's polygenic. It's going to be multiple genes, most likely. But the more that we can get genetic testing for this disease, for this condition, at least now we'll know who has it. Now, even if you have it, and this is the other problem, this is why I go back to when I hear doctors talk about like the immune system in EDS, I'm like, I think they're onto something because, you can have a swimmer like Michael Phelps, connective tissue, probably. He's hyperextensive. I think he's talked about it. You can be a tremendous athlete, right? And not have pain. So why is that? Why can you have the gene and have the hypermobility, but not have the pain? So you can have it. So to answer your question, I think those are the reasons why your patients are having trouble. The other problem that I see a lot, and I'll just put it out there for people in case it's useful, is if you are hypermobile, I struggle a lot with, I have back pain and they took my x-ray and I'm laying on a table. And I'm like, well, if you stand up, do you look different? And, that's another way that sometimes patients, get great results. It's fine. There's nothing wrong. Well, if you image them standing up, does it look the same? And I don't know the answer. Every patient's different. But, I guess my point is, yes, you can have patients that have all these issues and still come back and say, well, there's no gene, so you're fine. Your x-ray looked fine, so you're fine. And you're still not fine.
Yeah. To close out here, Donna, we could go on for a long time, but give us your frank ideas on where do we go from here? I mean, I'm interested in anything that this show can do, that our foundation can do, the people who watch this show can do. We've got a pretty good community of people now who are very interested. Give us your thoughts. What can we do from here?
That's a good question. Well, first of all, I think the most important thing you can do is kind of find your tribe, like find your people that understand and live this life. So like the fact that you have that with your foundation and this group is part of it. I think if we can help organize people to be more vocal, if we can create tools and materials for people to share, because like, let's be honest, there's nothing worse. You can't walk into a physician's office. I mean, you can, but this is what I have, you were wrong. That usually doesn't go over well. Because physicians, just, and no offense to the physicians here in the room, like you go into medicine to heal people. And I've noticed that doctors get uncomfortable sometimes when they don't know something. It just seems like a human response. So I think, I think honestly, the history is the whole idea is if we can get the education together and we can find ways for patients and people to share it, and we can get medical schools to start teaching it, that's how we're going to change it. But, in the short term, I do want to say, I do think we are approaching a tipping point in terms of hope. I do think with AI, I've been at some conferences with AI in medicine. I think we're getting closer. And I think, I know it doesn't help when you're having the worst day ever today, and tomorrow's going to be just as bad. But I do think that we're getting to a more hopeful place. And I hope so.
Well, I do too. I also want to compliment you for you guys have done one other thing that I really appreciate. You didn't get any government help. Nobody told you to do this. This was just the American way. And with what you've done, you got together with people who had a cause. You put together your money and your emotions. This film is a fantastic film. I hope everybody watches it.
I said at the beginning, we wanted to make a film to show these kids strength and resilience and what was happening in medicine. But I do want to say, we had unexpected and really bad things happen. We lost some of the kids in the film, and that's why it's so personal to me to bring their story forward. But just know that about the film. It's not a patient awareness film. It's kind of what happens to human beings when they can't get the care they need kind of film.
Do you have an email or a Twitter or
Yes.
Blue Sky?
Yeah, so you can get information about the film. It's Open Eye Pictures. openeyepix.org is for the film Complicated.
Well, again, we've come to the end of the hour, and I know that a lot of people would love to go on talking, and they certainly can. But our show will sign off, and we're so delighted that you're here. You've not only informative, you're motivational, and I want to thank you for everything you've done and all the people you work with. With that, Jamie, I will be signing off and turning it over to you. Thanks again. Good night, everyone.
Thank you,
Good
Tennant. Good night, Dr. Tennant. Thank you all so much for being here with us. We will be having monthly shows beginning the first Thursday of each month. And so we will not be doing weekly shows. We will see you again. See you then. And we'll see you also on Facebook. You are not alone. We are with you, and we're wishing love to everyone. Thank you, and God bless you.
If anyone can donate to Dr. Ibsen, please do. He needs your support more than ever right now. So thank you so much.
Yes.
He appears in every article, and you're within the norms.
Yes, thank you, Dr. Norm. You don't have to be his patient. Just if you know him, even if you just know him as a friend, he needs our support. A small, short, little brief letter just of support to show what type of person he is will help him.
Where do we send it?
Everyone can ask me on Gardy Cora Fisher on Facebook.
Perfect. Thank you, Cora, so much.
Put them on the Doc Talks Facebook.
Yes, yes, on the page. Too.
Yes.
Perfect.
Yes.
If you could do that, Cora, that would be so amazing, because so many people want to write and support him. They just don't know where to send the letters.
He definitely needs the GoFundMe more
Yes.
than ever right now.
That's right.
because-
And also even sending in letters via fax, they cannot deny those. So if you go to freefax.com
Oh,
or faxzero.com, there are literal links that you can click and it'll say contact your governor, and you just click it and it'll tell you what representative you have, and you can just type it up and it sends it straight to their office via fax.
oh,
So
that's great.
there's a
That's
pointer
great
too.
idea. Yeah.
Anybody that'll listen,
Our Florida governors listen.
I sure hope they will. I appreciate you so very much.
You can push the tip
Yeah.
button to 0 so
Yep.
that they don't take a fee, because otherwise
it.
GoFundMe
Right.
takes a huge fee.
They do take a huge fee, so slide that over. You can do
0.
anonymous ones as well, and if you just write a heartfelt letter, it doesn't have to be long,
Yeah.
it doesn't have to be anything personal, just a heartfelt letter.
I know.
I'm willing to do what it takes. So
Yes. Yeah, it's a good idea, Jamie.
thank you all for
Better.
helping.
Thank you.
We can't lose him. He's a wonderful person, and he has put his life on the line for
Fine.
so many people, and he doesn't do it for any other reason than wanting to save lives.
Yeah.
That's
Being
it.
railroaded.
That's it.
He could have hung it up forever ago and never looked back, but he didn't.
Mhm.
Yeah.
He's
Exactly.
being
Making
railroaded.
that sacrifice
Right.
for us, we can
That's
at least
right.
do that for him.
That's right.
I spoke to that medical
Y'all have a
board,
good
and
day.
clearly he's been railroaded.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. He has. That's exactly right. We're going to stand up and fight because, like you tell us,
I
Doctor,
took
if
before
we
that
stay
board.
silent, then there's no chance of winning if we stay silent.
Right.
We will lose
Exactly.
if we don't speak.
Actions speak more louder than
That's
words.
right. That's right,
I
Brando.
told
I'm gonna.
them that 75 people were gonna pass away. They revoke his license.
I
So
know. Thank you for writing that, Cora.
Thank you. I've just got to go. I've got another group that prayer
Gotta
Have a
group
good
get
night.
off.
for him.
thank
Love
you so
you.
much.
Y'all have
Love
a
you
great
all.
day.
Good
Y'all
night.
work with all
Thank
this.
you. I
And
love you
share
all.
your story to SOS, please.
Yes, thank you for remembering, Brandon. Please go to SOS. We finally
your
put the page
story on
together.
there, create a
so that
reel.
we don't have to all meet 1,000 people at one time. You can just create your reel, your story, your video, and just put it at your leisure. If you're up at 2 in the morning and you decide, you know what? I want to share my story. I want to share some pictures and show the world. You're going to be one of the people that will be shown to representatives and anyone that can change these things. It will be directed to them. So this is a
Thank
big
you.
deal. If you could please participate, we'd appreciate it.
Yes. Yes.
Thank you all so
Thank you
very, very
all.
much for
Thank you,
sticking with us
Cora.
and believing in us.
Thank you guys.
Thank you
Thank
all.
you.
You're not
Thank you,
alone.
Ms. Sullivan,
You
for
are loved.
having for
Yes,
your presentation. Thank you so much.
Thank
That's
you
a great
too.
one.
And
Ms.
read
Sullivan.
your withinthenorms.com.
That's
Yes,
right. That's
are
right.
within the
You are
norms.
within the norms.com.
Right.
I
We
love
are
you
within the
guys.
This is
norms.
you're within the norms.
That's
You're
right.
within the
I'm gonna put
norms.
your
I love
Ms.
it.
Sullivan, your struggle is gonna be within the norms.
I
Yes.
love it.
Mhm.
I love
James
it.
is with you're
Love it.
within the norms. You know, Dr. Tennant is in you're within. I put you in there today. We wrote
That's
another
awesome.
arm, put you in there
Taking
today.
names and
You're so
kicking
awesome.
And
butt.
Donna, you're gonna be there. Donna Sullivan, you're in there. You're within the
Thank
norms.
you. That's right.
Okay.
Good night, everyone. You're
Bye
free
now.
to
Good
unmute
night.
and say
Great
good night if
night.
you want to,
Good
and we're going to
night.
go ahead and take off. I love all of you and have a good night.
Night, everybody.
Bless you.
Good night,
Yeah.
everyone.
Bye.
Prayers tonight for Dr.
Night.
Ibsen.
I love you, Pain Warriors.
Yes.
Love
You
you too, Carson.
too.
Love you. Love
Love
you,
you,
Susan.
Cora.
Man in pain.
Love you, Valerie.
Love you guys. Stay
Jamie.
strong.
Love you,
Yeah. Good
Warriors.
night, John boy.
Hi, Carson.
Good night, Ellie Mae.
Good night,
Night,
Mary
night, Ellie
Ellen.
Mae. Yeah, Mary Ellen, that's it.
Good night, crazy chick. Good night, Cora.
We did get John Boy, though, right?
That's right. We
Yeah.
did get John Boy.
We
All
did
right.
get John
Bye,
boy.
Carson.
Yeah.
Goodbye, Wendy and Logan. Sleep tight.
Good night, family. I love you all so much. Thanks for
We
being
love
here.
you too.
Love you too,
We love
Jamie.
you more
We'll
than
see
you
you
know.
soon.
Big, big love.
Good night.
Bye.
Yes.
Bye.